Hi, I just picked these up from a local resort and they wanted these rackets fixed up. However, there are a couple of broken rackets in here that they wanted to dump. But instead of dumping them, I thought it would make a perfect candidate for this video, where I share with you a couple of techniques and I'll be using a couple of different staplers. All right, let's go inside. All right, so let's take a look at what's in this box. A lot of these rackets are junior rackets, and for these, I'm not gonna restring them. It's not even worth it, but I will replace the grip, and I'll be using a technique that I did in a previous video titled Custom Overgrip Wrap, and you can check that video out. So there's a bunch of these 21, 23-inch rackets in here. Got a couple of 25-inch rackets right here. And the rest of them are adult rackets, but they all appear to be aluminum rackets. Yeah, so again, when you're dealing with an aluminum racket, it's not really worth restringing because you probably could get a new racket for probably about $20. So I'll go ahead and replace the grips. And I have a feeling that the butt caps on some of these might be needing some repair. But I wanted to point out these two specifically. That was one, the butt cap is completely off, and you can see that it's actually broken at some parts of the pallet. And on this other one, this butt cap is actually kind of loose, so I'll be addressing that in one of my two techniques. All right, so we'll get into the tools next. All right, so here are the possible tools that you'll need for the two techniques that I'll be sharing with you today. And the first one is the electric stapler, and this is the Roberts brand, and I'll provide the link below in the description where you can check that out. Then this is a manual arrow stapler. Then we have JB Weld, which is an epoxy, and then I also have a DevCon 5-minute epoxy. Then I have an old string card that I'll be using to mix the epoxy on, and the popsicle stick will be mixing it. And I have an awl to remove the staples, masking tape in case I might need it, a hammer, and a pair of scissors. This first technique is a simple tacking technique, and what I'm hoping is that this butt cap that's loose on this racket, all I need to do is remove the existing staples and then just retack it. And I am using an awl that's specifically used for this purpose. This is not my stringing awl. You want to make sure you have something that's really strong because you can break the tip and sometimes you can even bend the tip. So it looks like these staples are coming out nicely, and I'll just take this off. And so the butt cap is intact. It's not broken. So what I am gonna do is make sure that the butt cap itself is snug going in, and there's a little bit of give on this. So what I am gonna do is make sure I use, I'll go with one layer of masking tape to make sure it's a little bit more snug. Now the other thing that I wanted to make sure that I do, and this is just me being picky, is that I wanna put the butt cap on exactly the way it came off. So I was paying attention to the logo and making sure that it stayed up and I wasn't flipping the racket around. To some people it might make a difference if you repair their butt cap and for some reason it's facing the other way. So anyway, I'm just gonna keep that butt cap up and make sure I keep the racket in this position. And you can even look at the logo on the side. Sometimes you can just make sure that you take note of that. So I'm just gonna look at that and make sure that the butt cap is up, matching that. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put one layer. I think that'll be enough to make this butt cap more snug on the pallet. And so what I'm gonna do is just go one rotation and just cut it off at that point. You know what, actually I'm gonna go at two because it feels like this could probably use a second layer. So just cutting it off right here. And we got that graphic there, butt cap is up. And we're just gonna slip this on right here. Goes on. All right, there it is. All right, so it feels nice and snug right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the manual stapler on this, And this pallet is a molded urethane, so most manual staplers can go into that material. So what I am gonna do is just make sure that I'm on a nice solid base. So I have a nice solid table here, so I'll just use this. And what I want to make sure that I do is I don't go into the existing holes that the staplers came out of. So, and I usually like to do it on the not on the angled bevels, but on the, like the, I guess you could say the 12 and the 6 and the 9 and the 3. So that's what I'm gonna do on this racket. And I'm just gonna make sure that I keep it nice and flat down onto the surface. And with this manual stapler, I just like to make sure that it's aligned and that right at the moment of impact, I'm just pressing down on the gun also, so that it goes in. A lot of times if it doesn't go in, we can just use a hammer and just make sure that we pound that staple in. All right, then I'm just gonna flip it over to the opposite side and tack it. And right now I'm tacking it right in about the middle of the butt cap. You can see that, it's like the middle section. And before I put on the other two staples, I always like to make sure that the racket can stand up, because I want to make sure that it can do that. So if it can't, then what I will do is reposition the butt cap before I tack it on and make sure that at least it's aligned. All right, so for these last two edges or bevels, I'm gonna bring the butt cap to the edge of the table, and I don't want to tack it on because a lot of times if I do it this way, it might actually reposition the butt cap. So I'm just gonna hold it right at the edge and get the tack gun right there. And that one didn't go quite in all the way. You can see that it's sticking up. So I am gonna hammer that in, and then I'll go on the other side. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and hammer that in now because it's sticking up. So normally I would do this on a hard surface, but I'll go ahead and do it on this table right now. If it doesn't work, then we might have to go outside and I can show you how I would do that. All right, so that went in. I'm just gonna go ahead and pound the other two while I'm at it. All right, so I'm gonna do the last side. Pound that in. All right, so that went in nicely. You can see that all the staples on each side went in. Now, you're gonna find that sometimes when you're using a manual stapler, that it might have a hard time penetrating even the urethane foam, because if it hits the metal part of the frame that's underneath it, then that's when the staple will start to bend and it won't go through. So this one just barely made it. I actually smashed down the staple a little bit. So anyway, that worked out. The main thing is that it's nice and flat. And as you can see right now, the butt cap, well, it's not moving anymore. So that's the simple tacking technique. Now, this simple tacking technique won't work if you have a racket that has a graphite shaft. That's actually the pallet itself. So you can see on this example, you know, the pallet is made out of graphite versus this is the urethane foam. So this stuff is really solid, and I can demonstrate how to do it with a manual stapler, but there's no way that's gonna penetrate. And what's gonna happen is that staple is gonna bend, and you don't want that to happen. So I'll go ahead and put as much I can on it just to get this in. Yeah, so you can see what happens there. There's that space right there. And even if I try to pound this in, trust me, it's not gonna go in because this stuff is solid. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. And I'll provide a picture of what I removed off of this butt cap because those staples are quite long. And so anyway, this is where I'm gonna use the electric stapler because this stuff will penetrate. And yeah, I was actually looking for an electric stapler, and thanks to Albert Lee, he's a former pro tournament stringer, I reached out to him, and he actually recommended this. So this is a new gun that I just got, and I already installed one, and I just had to get a feel for the gun so I could share that with you on this video. But what I found out is when you pull the trigger on the electric gun, you don't need to exert any force. In fact, it was actually not going in as well. So, all right, so what I decided to do is come outside because I did make one attempt on the table and it wasn't going in. In fact, this first staple that I did put in here was when I did this on the floor. But I am outside and I'm actually working on a curb with a newspaper to protect the frame. But the staple gun only works as good as a surface. I find if it's a nice, firm, solid surface, then the staple gun works better. And what I'm gonna do is just make sure that I'm gonna aim it a little bit on the higher side because the staples are very long. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip this over and do this second side. Get up a little bit higher than normal, but I wanna get it right there. And see that one right in there. So that's the second side. Yeah, I might want to pound that in a little bit, but you know, it's pretty good right there. So I'm just gonna flip this over, and what's good about the curb is that you can actually angle it down like how I did on the table. But let me just check to make sure that the butt cap is nice and level. If this racket can stand up, and it can, so that's good. All right, so I'm gonna just go ahead and I have a towel back here, so I'm gonna rest the butt cap over here on the edge of the curb. I have the racket back here that's resting on the towel, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the other two sides. That went in nicely. We'll do the other side, and that went in nicely. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get the hammer and just maybe pound this one that didn't go in quite as well. There's a little bit of bump there. The second technique is the repair and restore technique. And I have a couple of options here. The first is when you have a squeaky butt cap. And what I mean by that is sometimes, and I don't have an example here, but Babolat rackets for some reason tend to have that squeaky butt cap. So basically it's a butt cap that's a little bit loose. And when you move it, I mean, when you try to move it, actually has a creaky sound. So some players, for some players that annoys them. So if that's the case, that's a pretty simple repair and restore. What I'll do is probably use the 5-minute epoxy. And this one is, it works really fast. It sets in 5 minutes and it cures in about an hour. It's 1500 PSI, pounds per square inch in terms of strength. But if I really wanted to repair something like the racket that I got in the box that I showed you that broke in pieces like that, I would use the JB Weld, and this is about twice as strong. It's over 3000 PSI. It does set in 6 minutes, but it takes 4 to 6 hours. I usually leave it overnight to fully have it cured. But I'll go ahead and use the JB Weld on this particular racket. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and mix the epoxy, and basically you're just gonna put an even amount. And I'm gonna use quite a bit because what I'm gonna do with this is I'm actually gonna fill those cavities that's missing. If the butt cap or if the pallet has the missing pieces, sometimes it's stuck in the butt cap, then you can kind of piece it together. But in this case, I'm gonna use the epoxy to kind of fill those spots. So that's one of the good things about the JB Weld. It can be used to kind of shape and fill the missing, the cavities in the grip, in the pallet. All right, so I have an even amount there. I'm just gonna go ahead and mix it. It's gonna eventually turn gray, and that's when I know it's ready to be used. So what I'm gonna do is apply it onto the palette first, and the popsicle stick works really well because basically I'm just gonna throw it away after I'm done. So I'm just gonna bring this up here, and basically I'm just gonna try and fill the spots, the areas where, again, where there's a cavity. It won't be a perfect fill, but at least it'll kind of, once it's cured, it'll, at least there's something there versus having just that cavity that's missing. So once I get all the sides filled in, then I'll go ahead and apply some of this onto the inside of the butt cap. All right, so I'm just gonna let this stay there. And then with the rest of the epoxy that I have, I'm gonna apply it inside of the butt cap. And just get it on all 8 sides. Probably could have squeezed out a little bit more epoxy, but I'll make do with what I have here. Yeah, I find this JB Weld stuff works really well. So, and if for some reason it oozes out the next day, you can actually you can cut or you can sand it down actually. So it's really good how it hardens to the point where you can actually do that. All right, so I've used up all the epoxy. I'm just gonna throw this away. Now I did pay attention again to the butt cap, which side was up. So I was looking at that head logo, and that's what I had that on the right side. So I'm gonna just go ahead and slip this butt cap on here. So make sure all the sides are okay. And I shouldn't have thrown my popsicle stick away, because what I'm gonna do is there's some stuff that's oozing out over there. So I'm gonna just make sure I scrape that off. Bring this back here. And again, even though it might look messy right now, you can always clean it up the next day and just kind of sand it off if there's any rough edges. All right, so I'm gonna just wipe it off too, just to get that off right now. All right, so this is what it looks like so far. And what I'm gonna do on this application is I'm gonna use the electric stapler. And because it's the urethane mold palette, I'm pretty confident that doing this on the table would be all right. And I don't have to go outside and do it on the curb. All right. So while I'm stapling it down, I'm gonna I don't wanna get my tablecloth epoxy on it, so I'm just gonna put this down here. All right, so I'll start with this flat beveled side, and I'm just gonna center it and get it down here. That one right in there, and flip it over to the other side. And we'll do the leveling test to make sure the racket can stand up. Okay, so that's good. Now again, I'm gonna bring this racket, the butt cap, to the edge of the table and just try and match the, basically what I'm doing is matching the edge of the butt cap, which is angled, and kind of make that rest flat on the table, on the edge of the table, while I tack in the opposite end of the butt cap. Gets a little tricky because you gotta hold it in place while it's kind of balancing on the edge. Right, funny thing happened. I was in the middle of working on this racket. I tacked in the first side, and then for some reason after that my camera went off. So anyway, I finished off the racket. I tacked in the 4 sides of this racket, and you can see how that worked out. And I have another identical racket that I did the night before. So this one was done the same way. And the butt cap is definitely secure, so there's no way this is gonna come loose. That epoxy is pretty permanent once you get it on there. There's another racket here that I started to film, and again the camera shut off. So there is epoxy on this already, but I had to take it off and wipe it. So but I did want to show you this because this one's slightly different. And what's different about this, there are some cavities in this butt cap, and it's hard to see because the epoxy is still on there, but I tried to wipe it off. But on this particular one, in the butt cap, and again, it's all black because of the epoxy, there was a piece of the pallet that's in this butt cap. So what I did is I left that piece in there, and it's held in by this staple right there. So I left that one in. And the reason for that is I'm gonna make sure that I fit it onto the pallet, so it's like a missing piece that I'm gonna just put back together, and that'll just help make everything just line up the way it was. So I'll go ahead and proceed with this one, and hopefully the camera won't shut off again. But I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the epoxy. I'm gonna just make sure I have about an equal amount of each one. Okay. And I'll go ahead and fill it. I tried to wipe it off, but there is some still on there, so at least I won't have to fill it as much. So here's that racket. That was, so yeah, there's definitely cavities in this, and even though you won't be able to see it, I am gonna fill most of it with all this epoxy here. And again, when it's hardened, at least it gives the butt cap something solid to rest on. So instead of just floating, because there was a cavity there, now it's gonna be actually securely resting on something solid. All right, so that's pretty good right there. And I'm gonna do the same thing I did on the previous racket. I'll just go ahead and fill. But again, there is definitely a piece of that pallet in there. So when I insert it onto the pallet, I'll just make sure that this matches up. Now when I was stapling the previous racket, I was using the table because I felt like the urethane mold palette wasn't gonna be as hard, not as difficult as the graphite one I did that I had to go outside. So I'm assuming this one will be the same. If not, I have to go outside again, but all right, so here's that. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that they line up. And it was on this way. All right. So I'm just gonna make sure that it's nice and level. Now you could probably you could repair the racket probably without the tacks because the epoxy is so strong that it It probably doesn't even need it. All right, so that's good, it's level. But there's some epoxy that I have to scrape off there on the edges, so I'll go ahead and do that. And then I'll wipe it off with the paper towel afterwards. All right, so okay, so we'll go ahead and do this all over again here. Now that side that has that, you can see that, but this is the side that has that staple still in there. So I'm just gonna go right down below it and start with that side first. All right, so that one didn't really go in. Got the other side. There. We'll make sure it's still standing up and it's level. That's good. Now we got this last two sides here, right on the edge. I know you can barely see that, but just try and get this in here. Got that side, and finally that side. All right, so that went all in. Just make sure it's still standing up. Yeah, so again, I'm gonna leave this overnight and let it cure, and yeah, it should be good. Okay, so first we're gonna start with this racket, and this is the one I showed you earlier that has a loose butt cap. I didn't take it off yet, so I'm not sure what's under there. It might be actually broken, but we'll find out. So this first technique is called the simple tacking technique, and I'm hoping that all I need to do is, okay, I wasn't expecting that. Well, anyway, you can see that it's broken. So I will have to use the second technique on this one. Well, it's off to the courts they go. Thanks for watching, happy repairing, and let your strings play.